happy to be here with you guys today and hopefully start off your day teaching you a little bit about my view of kind of where healthcare is going in terms of utilizing the Internet of Things, some of the key concepts that I think are going to be important, and then one concept you'll see here is data centricity and using a data-centric architecture to really help develop next-generation medical devices. So, a little background about me. I've spent almost 20 years in embedded development, 10 years in embedded healthcare development. Started my career with Motorola, worked with Freescale. I actually started up a medical device business within Freescale. Ran that through the acquisition of NXP. And one thing that I noticed throughout my career in silicon and hardware was the amount of investment I needed to continue making in software to make my hardware valuable. And I think that's definitely something that, a trend across the board you're going to see more and more of. And that's really brought me to the company I'm with today. And I'll talk a little bit about the networking software that Real-Time Innovations does, where I'm leading up their healthcare business there. So the things that we're going to talk about today, just the current state of healthcare, kind of my view of, really talking to a lot of, clinicians, payers, providers, and embedded engineers, what I'm seeing in the healthcare market, how the IoT could be a potential solution to that, some of the challenges of implementing that, and then really an introduction into data centricity and a technology called data distribution service. And then lastly, just a really quick introduction into my company, Real-Time Innovations. So the first thing to mention is the internet really has revolutionized quite a few industries. And I say the internet, I think actually just technology in general. It comes into industries and really has transformed a lot of the industries that you see up here. Music, television, transportation, retail, publishing, and there's many others. And in most cases, what they've done is really taken what had largely been a capital equipment or hardware and turned it into a software and services business. And that's definitely something that you can say from a healthcare perspective, there really hasn't been a ton of change there. Yes, the silicon has more transistors. We've increased the performance. I just put an example of an imaging device here, and yeah, we've higher resolution, but overall, outside of maybe being a little bit smaller and sleeker, strikingly similar. Still selling the same type of device, and probably selling it for a significant amount of more money, which is something you see here. And actually, this is one of my favorite charts, just in terms of looking at where are areas that are ripe for technology to begin disruption. I mean, you look at, from 1980 to, I guess 2016, you really see technologies played a role, I think, in a lot of the industries you see there. And because of that, the actual cost of that product or service has continued to go down. I think the two that are notable here is you look at medical care and you look at college, and they're two areas that I think, technology has not necessarily, touched in terms of, bringing efficiencies. But along with that, it's not just a dollars and cents game. I think there's a lot we can be doing just to really improve the overall quality of life for all of us. So it was kind of, news to me. I'm always amazed when I read this, but, medical error is the third leading cause of death behind cancer and cardiac disease. So, it's crazy to think about that. And when you have stats like that, you start thinking of, why would we not, look at the data and start actually making, data-driven decisions versus having these issues with, medical error. Another key piece, lack of medical device interoperability. So having an entire hospital or hospital network devices that can communicate with each other. We don't have that today. I think everything is in proprietary silos, and even once it gets to the cloud, that cloud data cannot be really aggregated easily. And really the last two data points here, the problem is doing nothing more than really getting worse. I mean, we have more and more of us living longer and longer, and with that, most of our medical care comes in the later years of our life. So in terms of increasing cost, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in healthcare to really begin embracing a lot of available technology. And that was really the message, when I was working with silicon companies, and now still the message when you're working in the software space. So my initial dream when I started my career in technology and kind of shaping it towards healthcare was, step one, if we just connect all these medical devices, this problem will be solved. I was definitely not prepared for the amount of complexity that it takes to make that happen. Just connecting these devices may have actually made the situation even more complex. I started with putting USB and Ethernet into a lot of different medical devices, but again, now you have that data and it's taken and put into a silo. So it's not necessarily as easy as just adding connectivity or adding wireless connectivity. You actually need to make sure that connectivity is reliable, secure, and actually, so why is this actually so hard to implement? The first thing is connectivity is one piece, but even within connectivity, there's so many different choices. Are you using Ethernet, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Bluetooth low energy? I mean, there's such a variety of protocols that even within those different protocols, they don't communicate. You start talking about interoperability, and really until I ran into the technology I'm going to tell you about, DDS, my question was, I don't even know if that's possible, because there really wasn't a technology available and out there that allowed the amount of security reliability within a system to really meet the needs of the healthcare market. And if you don't have a technology that is a standard across the board, you're going to continue having these proprietary silos and nothing will end up communicating together. So you have challenges with interoperability. Security, and then security is almost table stakes, I think, at this point. But I think it's going to become continuously more and more important as more of these devices become connected. The interesting piece of real-time analytics, I think this is one that gets probably the most press right now. I mean, you always read about AI in healthcare and how it's going to save billions of dollars. And my big question, and I hear this from a lot of the payer and provider community, is how is it actually going to do that? I mean, we have the electronic medical record, which is essentially the cloud, designed for billing systems, and we're supposed to pull data out of there and make actual real-time clinical decisions. And I think they realize that, yes, you can do something there, but I don't think you're at a state where you actually have enough data to make true value of real-time analytics, AI, and machine learning. So how do we actually solve this problem? And that's really introducing the idea of data-centric connectivity. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a technology called a data bus, which is really just a shared data space that allows all the devices within your network to communicate interoperably using a standard data model. So I touched on this a little bit, so I'm not going to spend a bunch on this slide, but today the conventional use of the word IoT really is a device to a gateway up to the cloud. And the cloud in the healthcare world is generally electronic medical record. In many cases, they're consumer application focused. That sort of model has very limited scalability. The performance doesn't need to be real time, being that you're just storing the data in the cloud, planning to do analytics later. Reduced capability and utility, and then also, generally much more limited security. These are not designed, I would say, for mission critical systems. The type of systems that are being deployed are actually strikingly similar to the systems that are being deployed in the smart home. And everybody knows, probably rebooted your Wi-Fi router once this week. And that's the type of stuff that you cannot have happen in a healthcare always-on environment. So really the way I like to say this is, from a technology standpoint, we're in a world today where almost everyone talking about the IoT is looking at monitoring applications. So these are applications where you're sending data to the cloud, looking at doing analytics at a later time. But in order to make an impact in terms of saving money, improving patient care, you really need to start looking at this almost like a automated factory. How do you get into actually saving doctors time through optimization, which is essentially clinical decision support? So no device is actually controlling another device, but the device is actually making recommendations through analytics collected at the edge, with a hope and dream of moving towards autonomy. Talking to a bunch of anesthesiologists, you'd be amazed at, going into that medical error, how many people end up dying because of infusion with a drug that probably shouldn't have been infused. So the patient monitor is reading something, it's showing a patient in decline, but there's nothing that's automatically telling that infusion pump to stop. And that's, I think, where we can start getting into real-time automation. And the technology we need to do that is really focused around data centricity, and I'll introduce that concept right now. So data centricity can be thought about as a situation where the interface is the data. You no longer have a messaging broker You're not sending data to a cloud, sending a message, asking for data out of a database. You actually have a shared data bus that allows you to create a shared data space, and it really provides this interoperable network of real-time communication. So in terms of data centricity, both a database and a data bus are considered data centric, but one is for storage of old data. The other is really for, I can't even say storage, but it's for future data. It's a situation where you have a number of devices connected to a network that are publishing data at a certain rate, and other devices subscribing to that data at a certain rate. So every device within that network can get data from another device in that network in real time, securely, and reliably. And the nice thing about this is DDS is the technology behind this data bus, and this is an open standard. So this isn't something that is closed. It eliminates the walls in terms of proprietary network protocols. This is something that anybody and everybody can use. It's from the world's largest software standards organization, the OMG. And the other great thing is multi-vendor. There's open source options, there's commercial options, but in terms of the interoperability piece, allowing these devices to communicate with each other, having an open standard is exceptionally important. And as I mentioned, I mean, the other, I'd say, competing standards, which I'll talk about in a little bit, do not have the same sort of capability. So this talks a little bit about some of the other, potential architectures that you could choose when designing an IoT system. And I think all of these, with the exception of, the data-centric piece of DDS and the shared data bus model, really focus much more on that kind of edge to cloud connectivity. It doesn't focus on the need to actually do analytics much closer to the devices as opposed to the cloud. So, in the world of point-to-point communication, you have TCP and socket connection. This is generally, I think, some of the first kind of messaging architectures out there. Client-server, probably one that is actually most popular today in terms of using things like MQTT and web services in terms of a client-server model. And then you have different publish-subscribe, some queuing service models, and then data centricity and DDS, which actually uses that shared data bus and allows the interface to all of your devices to be the data. So I think good news for healthcare is this isn't a brand new technology. I think healthcare in general is, we'll say, I think smartly apprehensive to adopt anything completely brand new. But this is a technology that's been around for quite a while, deployed in thousands of systems, and really its heritage is in autonomous systems, specifically in aerospace and defense. And in addition to being a standard, it is widely available and widely adopted. So some of the other markets that this is big in, I mentioned aerospace and defense. I think probably the one that is, I'd say, most comparable in terms of features is automotive. So right now, this is a technology that is really starting to drive its way into the autonomous vehicle space, which is another exceptionally mission-critical, highly reliable networking space. So I think I've hit on some of these kind of key performance characteristics of the technology of DDS and how that applies to a data bus technology. But the key features, high performance. So I mentioned high performance. This puts a little bit of context to that. So I mean, if you have a system that needs sub 10 microsecond latency, that's the type of system this is. I mean, I know a lot of folks talk about real time or near real time. I mean, this is truly real time performance. And then in terms of throughput, the probably highest throughput applications are streaming patient data and or imaging data. And this network and networking middleware actually supports that. And we actually have deployments of greater of 40 gigabytes of throughput per second. So very high performance networking technology, reliable and secure. I mean, the fact that it's been deployed in quite a few systems already today, and I say quite a few as in thousands, provides that syntactic interoperability amongst all of these devices, eliminating the silos within all of these proprietary architectures. And then lastly, I haven't really mentioned, but a lot of the architectures I mentioned in the previous slide really don't have the ability to scale into not only thousands, but millions of nodes. I mean, you think of a hospital network, the amount of really the amount of hardware equipment they have within that network, something like a Kaiser. I mean, that could be millions, tens of millions of nodes, and this scales very nicely to that size. But this slide's actually an animation. It's going to give a pretty good idea of how the shared data space works. But you can really see the blue area is the shared data space. You have medical devices, you have supervisory, you have a cloud, you have a nursing station. These medical devices are set up to publish data at 1,000 times per second. And that data from a quality of service will say it's reliable for 10 seconds. You now have a nursing station that can subscribe to that data, and you can set that up however it wants. It might not need it at 1,000 times a second. It only needs it at 10 times a second if the patient is Joe. So you set up the quality of service there for a specific patient, and you put together a contract between those two, and now, whenever that nursing station needs data from that device, it will automatically publish to that particular device, which is the nursing station. So how does this work in a larger scale system? And this is really kind of a high-level architecture of a hospital. And we really see, having one of these networks in each hospital room, in each hospital ward, in each hospital network. And then essentially you have gateways that connect to things like the enterprise systems, the admit-discharge system, the EMR, the PACS system for imaging. So with that, these are all of your cloud-based systems, but all of your kind of real-time system is operating, lower, much down to the device level. So a really, unique technology, a unique concept, and a different way to think about actually designing your systems, but it's designing your systems with interoperability in mind from the beginning. And with that, to get that interoperable technology, you need to make sure you meet a lot of the kind of mission critical aspects, which is reliability, security, and scalability. So for those of you guys that are in the embedded software space, I just wanted to give a quick look on where does this actually apply to your system. And this is a connectivity stack or framework as outlined by the Industrial Internet Consortium. And this really lives at the framework level and a little bit down to the transport level. So generally, a hardware silicon provider will provide you the physical, the link, and the networking layer. Anything that sits on top of TCP is available for use. So this again shows anything that's in an IP stack can use this DDS technology. So lastly, to kind of close out, I want to introduce you to RTI. So Real-Time Innovations, we are a leading provider of DDS technology. Those thousands of deployments that I mentioned, a majority of those are ours. So it's a business that is not a startup. We've been around since 2003, and our technology has been used in all of the autonomous systems in aerospace and defense applications. So a lot of major airline manufacturers in terms of their autopilot type systems, in terms of the U.S. military. I think the entire Navy fleet is powered with DDS technology, specifically RTI DDS technology. We are a leader in the standards efforts. So in terms of pushing that DDS standard to continually be better and better and fit the IoT more and more, we're leaders there. And lastly, just the one thing that I think brought me to RTI specifically was the fact that you have this unbelievable underlying technology of DDS. But the simple fact is, where it best fits is in these mission critical systems, which is healthcare, autonomous vehicles, aerospace and defense, smart grid. Those are not the type of applications that you generally grab open source code and start modifying and then submit through a regulatory agency. That really there's some significant value in working with a commercial off-the-shelf software vendor that has access to this technology. Because those of you designing medical devices, correct me if I'm wrong, but I hear every day from you folks that really what your customers are asking for in terms of product requirements are a better user interface for their workflow and better data analytics. Really, the data that they're using is almost an afterthought. And the nice thing is this technology gives you access to data that you would not have had access to before. So, right now we're working again with, quite a few different standards efforts. One that I suggest all of you guys to keep track of is the Medical Center for Interoperability. So this is a group that I'm working closely with to really just help influence the medical device world in general and make this a standard for all medical devices. And then really it can be used, I mean, you can choose to use commercial offerings, you can choose to use open source offerings, but at the end of the day, if you have that standard, it literally removes those silos that we mentioned in terms of allowing devices within the same network to communicate. So lastly, we do have a product suite, so 4 different products based on really what you exactly need. But in terms of deployment within the healthcare space, I mentioned a lot of aerospace and defense applications. As you could imagine, as a healthcare company yourself or engineer, very few of our customers are willing to openly talk about using our technology. This is a list of folks that are. And I think one of the biggest deployments we have, and one of the most exciting for me, because it really shows the power of this technology, is we're in the middle of a 5-year engagement with GE Healthcare. And it's not my ultimate dream. They're still trying to stay siloed. But all of that said, they've chosen this technology to create interoperability amongst all of their devices. I think all of you guys, well aware in the medical device world, generally you grow through acquisition. And when you grow through acquisition, you eventually grow up into a bunch of proprietary protocols that are not able to communicate. And GE has made that decision, I think, looking forward, seeing the power in the data and the analytics, that they're going to need, at least within their system, their ecosystem, a foundational technology that's going to allow them to interoperate. And to me, they've made that choice. We're going to continue working with them and take that product to market. But I do have a much bigger vision in what we can do with this technology across the entire industry. So with that said, thank you guys for your time. Hopefully you learned a little bit, and it was a pleasure speaking with you today.
David, my question for you regards blockchain.
Yes.
I didn't intend to be funny, but great. We had a very engaging speaker just a few months back talking about blockchain and how it will, at some point, be adopted by most industries. What do you see as the way to integrate your IoT work with the incoming blockchain technologies?
Well, I'd have to say blockchain is even further back on the technology lifecycle adoption than edge computing and DDS technology. I think the first place that I really see it playing is, in terms of securing the data that goes to the cloud. I think having that constant transactional record of each specific piece of data is going to be important. But I have, I guess, yet to see we'll say, deployed solution that would allow that to happen.
Has RTI begun in its development pipeline to be ready to support it when it's time?
So we do have a research organization that is getting involved in products that do involve blockchain. So, we do want to be aware of the technology, but I do not see RTI, at least today, integrating that into the offering.
So I have a couple of questions. One you might... Sorry, I'm Jeff Gable. Hi. So the first question you may have mostly answered, which is, how do you push this into the marketplace? And if you're selling to the Navy, they can just say, hey, all you Navy people do it. Whereas if you're selling into this open marketplace, so it sounds like you're attacking that by selling it to GE, they push it within their platform, and then you hope that it percolates from there.
Yes. So actually, I'd say there's kind of 2 aspects, almost 3 prongs to that strategy. One is the major medical device companies obviously have, I think, some major influence. Anybody who's going to want to be acquired by GE Healthcare would probably be, in its best interest to have DDS in its infrastructure, because it just makes it a much easier integration. So, having kind of one of those leaders out there, also trying to engage with some of the other leaders in that space is important. The Medical Center of Interoperability, so any sort of standards organization that I can get involved with, we are trying to work on and make sure, the value of what our technology is everybody's aware of that. And then there's also a unique group of customers that I'm actually getting quite a bit of traction in that, I guess a little history lesson is the medical device companies have a pretty solid history of not working exceptionally nice with the hospitals and the electronic medical records companies. So when electronic medical records were mandated, I think all the hospitals came back and asked, the medical device companies to provide that data in a format that would allow that to be published. And I think, the answer was, tough. We're not necessarily going to do that. So you end up having a lot of these kind of consultants that came up, and then even evolved past the consultants. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term called MDDS, or Medical Device Data Systems. So you had all these medical device data systems that really came up that provided a hardware and software solution that did nothing more than translate data out of these medical devices into an electronic medical record. That business kind of came and went, and if you followed the trajectory of those businesses, some of them have had to, actually most of them have been acquired, because obviously once they did all that, their revenue started flattening out. The smart ones started adding analytics on top of it, but they ran into the same problem that I just mentioned, is it's hard to do analytics on a poor data set. So I am actively pursuing these guys, and I can't give out names, but getting a lot of traction, kind of asking them, do you want a second run at this? You know, the first run was getting all the data into an electronic medical record. Now what I just proposed is a completely different data set that is used for AI, machine learning, and really automating the healthcare process. And I'm getting a lot of interest there. So the goal would be, and actually what ended up happening in that first round was the MDDS vendors came in, showed the hospitals, basically gave the hospitals what they initially wanted. And then once that industry had been completely disrupted, the medical device companies then complied to really put the MDDS vendors out of business. And my take is, let's just go through that same process again. If the medical device community can jump on board and try to create interoperability, but I will say for a small company, it's beneficial because you can integrate into a larger system. It is much more challenging as a giant organization. As I mentioned, GE Healthcare, I love their use case, but in their use case, they are making sure that they will interoperate with all GE devices. They will make sure that they do not interoperate with Philips or Siemens devices. But that's where I think the MDDS vendors come in.
And so my other question was just how this compares to other operability standards like HL7, or I think the other one is FHIR.
Yes.
So is this a strict competitor to them, or do they live at a different level of the layer?
No, it's a very good point. In order to make this work right out of the gate, there's going to need to be literally gateways, specifically from HL7 into DDS, and then specifically from DDS into FHIR. So it's almost like a translator at both ends. The issues with both of those is they're not as detailed in terms of their specification, that even if you have HL7 from different vendors will not communicate. FHIR from different vendors will not communicate. And that's where DDS has the specification up at a higher level, that really the key is if you choose DDS and its data-centric architecture, and then add in and this is a key piece, a widely adopted data model. So basically, all of these devices are speaking the same language. You now have that kind of dream of interoperability.
I'm Walt McClay from Belair. I've got a question about the small devices. I see the DDS is very good for large amounts of data. Is it suitable for a very small device sending a small amount of data, a device that's constrained in its ability to do processing? Like a sensor, yeah.
Really depends. Yeah, really depends on the use case. So in terms of your use case, you want that data to get sent to the cloud. What are you going to do with it after that? Is it something someone can look at later? Are you going to make diagnosis decisions based on that? The way I would answer that question is, for most of the kind of consumer medical devices that I've seen today, it's probably overkill. But you look at least my vision of where the world's going is, I think it was interesting to see Apple kind of coming out with its first, true diagnosis with its AFib detection on a watch. That's still probably nothing you need to detect and react to and provide therapy in real time. But if you can start detecting heart attacks doing that, then DDS becomes much more important. So it really depends on, really real time. You do have that benefit of reliability and security, but, do you want to interoperate with other devices? If you do, DDS becomes a much better fit. If you have real-time needs, DDS becomes a better fit. And if you want to communicate from device to a device, DDS becomes a better fit. If you're truly, in most wearables, a cellular connection up to the cloud, there are probably better technologies for that today.
Hi, my name is Donna Broadhurst from FPH, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. Just interested in how this might work for a global product where there is different requirements around data protection and security and I suppose where you can host servers and things like that. How is GE or how are your other clients getting around those kind of concerns?
Well, I guess from a global product perspective, I mean, the requirements for each of these countries you want to end up selling into is going to be different. And most of those actually give guidance. So I'd say, really what we provide is a piece to the puzzle. And in many ways, I rely on, the quality teams from, each of these medical device companies to, what exactly do you need in terms of documentation to satisfy those needs for each of the global regulatory agencies that you have. That said, coming from this aerospace and defense background, we have a significant amount of life cycle data, engineering process documents, things like that we do provide our customers on a regular basis to satisfy those regulatory needs. But in terms of, I don't know, does that answer your question? It answered it from regulatory, but when you talk about global in terms of just operating at a global level, from that said, as long as the underlying technology is IP-based, which I'd say that is pretty much a global standard, DDS can also be used on any medical device. I don't see any specific global standards organizations that specify or do not specify the use of this technology.
David, I'd say you were a hit. There are more questions that we don't have time to. In fact, we've gone over, but it's just John Spear next, so I just ate into his time.
Tough crowd. Well, again, thank you guys. If you want a card or want to follow up after, I'd be happy to have some additional conversations. So
David
thank
from
you.
Real Time Innovations.